Hello. So development-led archaeology has continued to prove vital to the recovery of important archaeological remains across Scotland from all time periods. In Edinburgh, or Leith if you want to get particular, this has led to a great uptick in the understanding of the city's industrial past. AOC have excavated a number of Leith's industrial sites and shown the growth of Leith from the vestiges of its siege works through to its nautical past and the continued ability to light up the town with its gasworks. Today I'm going to give a very brief look at a couple of the sites my colleagues and I have excavated across Leith over the past decade or so. Some of these are at various stages of post-excavation, some are complete. You'll know the ones that are complete because I'll speak about them more. And hopefully we can add as more excavations happen. I'm afraid it will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. There's some sites I won't talk about very much. And any injustices done to any of these sites are purely mine and not my colleagues in any way. The Siege of Leith, purely because it gives a good context of how important Leith has been from its inception through to now. So the tensions in the time period of the Siege of Leith, with the 1560 with the Reformation having divided Scotland along religious lines, as well as the presence of some 3,000 French troops to the allied to the Catholic Mary of Guise. Leith was sieged in the April of 1560, where a fleet and troops were sent to aid the besiegers. This led to new fortifications being erected around by the English at Mount Pelham in the Links, Mount Somerset to the southwest, Mount Falcon was finally constructed to harass the shore, and Leith Mills, as a bit of industry included, to make up for the ineffectiveness of Mount Pelham. By June 1560, Mary of Guise was dead, leading to the eventual French surrender upon a swift French departure. And then it was left to the locals to backfill. So in South Fort Street to the west of Leith, we were there to find a Georgian house. Instead I found part of the fortification ditches. I say part of the reason Leith was sieged and why it's always been concentrated is the port. It's always been an important centre for trade to come in and out of Edinburgh and its local environs. Anyway, during the excavation we found ditch, 4 slots were excavated and showed that there was animal bone, ostrich shell, all the kind of things you'd expect from this period of Leith. Ceramics were recovered ranging from Scottish redwares, likely residual Scottish white gritty ware, and suggesting 15th century onwards dates. Small round lead ball was also encountered. The ball bullet had suggestions of having undergone light impact and solid surface, as well as and these kinds of bullets were used in conjunction with muzzle-loading firearms at the time. As mentioned, we also had the remains of the Georgian era house, the overall footprint of this house was 22 by 13. It was sandstone and brick construction with sand and lime mortar bonding. The exterior walls comprised of rubble boulder foundations, sandstone blocks top. Structure appeared to have been the basal foundation. More interestingly, and again why this site ties to the wider industry of how Leith has been brought up and shows how a lot of these sites kind of interact with each other regardless. We had ash deposits from within the house that were used for damp-proofing layers, and a lot of this seems to have come from the local industrial sites, particularly probably the glassworks, which I'll discuss in a wee bit. I should probably name the name of this house, which is one of my favourite names of any Georgian house, which is Hill House Field House. It would have been a typical house for the time, again contributing to the overall wealth as Leith had grown up during this time period. As already suggested, the naval presence in Leith continued because of an important portage. During the 19th century, and what we now think of as the Navy, there were 2 separate entities, the Admiralty and the Navy Board. The picture on the very first slide of introduction is actually the Navy Board symbol that was on a boundary wall based down at the site I'm just about to discuss now. During our excavation at Constitution Street, we found remains of a part of the granary works which we've supplied the Navy, the Navy Board and the Admiralty, as well as a possible sea breaker wall, which you just see there. To be honest, at this point in time, this is quite a recent excavation. I've not got a whole lot to talk about it other than some nice pictures. But this, as I say, would have been an important part for supplying the growth of the Navy in the area. So, as I've already stated vaguely, Leith served as an important commercial conduit for Edinburgh wool during the 1500s and as a leading port in Scotland. This importance remained throughout the 20th century. The layout of the current docks of Leith represents centuries of industrial development involving land reclamation, which is partially what the seawall would have probably done as they reclaimed from Tower Street and continued on that way. And expansion necessitated by increasing trade, in particular from the 18th century onwards, which required the construction of even larger and more effective harbour infrastructure. John Rennie was employed from 1799 to assess the port area and augment the design of the docks to facilitate the growth of trade. Rennie is renowned for his prolific career as both civil and mechanical engineer, and can be considered one of the main instigators of the boom of large civil engineering projects across the country at the time. The four largest ports at the time from the mid to late 18th century in terms of weight of goods traded were Greenock, Port Glasgow, Leith and Aberdeen in that order, given the size of the other three, showing how important Leith is further. So in 2019, ahead of a housing development, my colleague Kai Wallace excavated the remains of the substantial surviving section of a heavily truncated wide linear wall, aligned east to west, with acutely angled protruding kink at the outer face, and the wall surviving the northernmost extent. This long and substantial wall base was truncated in its eastern extent by a horseshoe-shaped structure representing the surviving remains of the wall of a later dry dock, identified as the East Dry Dock, and was associated with a variety of narrow linear culverts and other stone and timber built foundations. The very tip of the second dry dock, the West Dry Dock, was identified in the southwest corner of the excavation. So the photo at the top there, handily in the opposite direction of my plan, so there you can see the East Dry Dock is in orange and the West Dry Dock in purple there. The wall's location and form, particularly this section, there's an acute angled exterior face appears to correspond with one of the pair of block-like features labelled proposed fortifications on Ainslie map of 1804, which appears later on Kirkwood's map published in 1817. The triangular-shaped feature is denoted on the 1817 map as a bastion appearing to be integrated on the outer seawall, with the second familiar bastion located further along the coast towards Newhaven. Rennie's observations and designs of the new dock made no specific mention of the word bastion or fortification to refer to the simply large seawall. It remains ambiguous whether Rennie intended the seawall to be formally fortified and additional military assets to the harbour's defence system, complementing the existing Leith Fort and Martello Tower, proposed in 1807 to defend the mouth of the harbour from potential seaborne attack. Anyway, on the very northern extremity of the West Dock was exposed during only the very northern extremity, of the West Dock was exposed during the excavation, but it corresponds to the feature as depicted on various maps and plans from 1817 onwards. The very tip of the dry dock was composed of large sandstone blocks and housed a set of steps leading down to the dock's basin. This connected to a curving wall and with dressed coping slabs forming around the northern end of the dry dock structure. The inner-facing stones were dressed and carved with tide level lines, and a series of metal mooring rings were set into the wall for purpose of securing vessels. Although the effects of truncation and damage to the early 19th century dock structures were visible during the later development of the area, many of the key structure of John Rennie's harbour design survived with no traces of earlier medieval and post-medieval port encountered. The remainder of the 19th century and early 20th century saw a change focus away from Rennie's original docks and successive developments extending further into the Firth of Forth, which provided deeper waters and more maintainable channel. The culmination of this development are impressive working docks in Port Leith, which still remain today. So perhaps unsurprisingly, rope and sail making have a long history in Leith as well, docks and whatnot as well. This is a large part due to the whaling industry, and according to tradition, King James IV included a ropeworks while establishing the dockyard at Newhaven. The first secure evidence of this ropework industry dates from the 1638. Kirkwood's map of 1817 shows the ropework industry occupying part of the Salamander Street site, depicted up there, and Poplar Lane. The Edinburgh Ropery Company and Leith Ropery Company are marked as occupying the south of Salamander Street, with Messrs Scales Ropery, Mr Allison's Ropework, and Leslie and Peyton's Ropework located further south. The Ordnance Survey maps from 1853 and 1876 show the Salamander Street site to be largely occupied by the ropeworks of the Leith Ropery and Edinburgh Ropery and Sailcloth Manufactory, where numerous rectangular buildings are depicted adjacent to the elongated ropewalk structures likely associated with offices and workshops. So Area 1 of our excavation from 2012, I think it was, by Ireland, Hindmarsh, occupied the northern part of the site and contained the densest concentration of archaeological remains, features in the south of Area 1 related to the ropeworks, while features to the north were associated with the 19th century industrial works identified on the Ordnance Survey maps. The Ordnance Survey Town Plan of Edinburgh 1853 permits excavated features to be clearly identified as pertaining to Leith Ropery and the Edinburgh Ropery and Sailcloth Manufactory, with a wall appearing to be marked to the north wall of a major linear building. On the site as well were also soapworks and ironworks, with the 1853 map depicting soapworks fronting onto Salamander Road, and buildings of which appear to have extended into Area 1 to the east of later wall 1002. This has been identified as the premises of William Taylor and Company, who manufactured soap, stearine and candles from at least the 1840s until the 1880s. Surviving areas of brick and stone surfaces and short section of stone wall foundation represent a building on the western edge of the soapworks that were encountered. On the other site, depicted there of Poplar Lane, we had the excavations dated to the north-south division of the site as early as the mid-17th century, and with Philip Gully, which represented the earliest setting out of this boundary. Contained clay pipe dated to the 1640 and 1680, with early mapping of the area, such as Roy's surveys of the mid-1700s indicating that the area to the west of Bath Street was under gardens at the time. Around these industrial sites, residential development was beginning, particularly from the early 19th century onwards, and the excavation provided evidence of the overbuilding of much of the site by residential development in the first quarter of the 19th century. It's likely the north of the site, behind the Fox Lane frontage, was occupied by large open yards prior to this time, with pit features like those seen in the north and the south, evidencing waste disposal and possible sand extraction. The construction of the buildings in the Fox Lane frontage following the infilling of at least some of these features. Building development along the Fox Lane frontage was visible on Kirkwood map of 1817 as evidenced by intermittent remains of stone walls at the area. From the mid to late 19th century development, the development of the Poplar Lane frontage and the second half of the 19th century was represented by further structures, which eventually led on to the metalworking in localised areas of the industrial activity in the yards to the west of Adelphi Place, the presence of brick and stone brick-lined gullies. And then just along the road from the ropeworks, we had one of the most famous sites in Leith, industrial sites in Leith at the time, which was its glassworks. In 2020, ahead of the new residential development again, my colleague Katie O'Connell excavated one of its most prominent past industrial sites. Just south of the sands of Leith, the eventual four cones of the 18th century Leith Glasshouse Company, eventually the Edinburgh and Leith Glassworks, dominated the skyline. Our excavations revealed all four of the cones documented and quickly changing processes associated with glassmaking, with all cones being technologically different. The site originally produced bottles, eventually producing crystal glass and then window glass. Fortunes began to turn in the mid-19th century as the two cones decommissioned and the site eventually became a chemical works. The earliest glass cone was cone A, which is this one, I believe, and found the site revealed a single substantial circular sandstone wall, though due to later truncations it was recorded in segments as walls. The cone was constructed of quarried angular blocks of yellow sandstone randomly coursed with sandy lime mortar. The wall segments were average width 1.75 metres and a maximum of 0.4 metres in height. To some extent, the development of technological innovation can be charted through all these cones, all four of them lined up from there that started in the east. The construction of the four glass cones and their furnaces, cones A and D, the first constructed, both had solid sandstone walls defining the perimeter of the cones, overlaying wooden substructures. It is likely, however, that it had several openings in the walls. Higher up in the structure, which was likely of brick construction. Cones C and B, however, were constructed in a different manner, utilising 8 solid plinths to support the superstructure. This would have been related to the function of the glasshouse and may have simply been an engineering and architectural development. The plinth base structures requiring considerably less stone and thus being more cost effective. Certainly cartographic evidence from the time, later constructed Leith Glassworks on the eastern side of Bath Road, indicates that 3 cones built were all of plinth construction. Then next door to that, we have, not to be confused as the glassworks, but the gasworks. This is one of our more recent excavations in 2024, where a monitored strip map and record occurred on the site of the former Edinburgh and Leith gasworks, which is also beside the naval yard, as I discussed earlier. The site began being built in the 1820s and started to produce gas for the city in 1825. During this phase of the site, there was likely 8 gas holders, a large retort building where the gas was produced, condensers and purifying house. During the excavation, 7 of these gas holders were excavated. However, it was noted that none of these, other than gas holder F, remained relatively untouched or unmodified in some capacity. During the excavation and consulting historic mapping, it became clear that the capacity of the gasworks could not keep up with the demand at the time, as many of the gas holders began to be changed into coal sheds or further purifying houses, suggesting that the gas was being distributed to the city so quickly that storage wasn't necessary. By the 1890s, there were no gas holders remaining, with every building being converted into coal storage, retort furnaces or purifying houses. The site was eventually closed in 1906 and replaced by the Granton gasworks. Much of the below ground assets were well preserved, with my favourite being gas holder F, which is that one there. It was 13 metres in diameter with a total height of 0.8, 3 concentric walls and a central circular pillar with sandstone construction separated by narrow channels allowing access between. Though I say it was relatively untouched, it was eventually a coal store and was filled with poor quality coal. One of the other nicer features encountered was a retort furnace on top of what should have been a further gas holder. This is where they would burn the coal to produce the gas to be pumped out into the city. As I say, there was a survey in the 1970s ahead of this, the entire gasworks being demolished and changed into a later timber yard, which gave us this indication of where all the gas holders should have been, however never recorded the fact that they'd all been converted. The entire retort structure was nearly 22 metres in length, and it was constructed using distinctive blocks that suggested it could have been further expanded if necessary. Unfortunately, though not thoroughly unexpected, there was very limited finds across this site. Didn't find their canteen, so nothing really to say much to it. And then finally, we have another site in Leith Walk, which was an iron foundry excavated by my colleague Scott Morris. The site is located within the original medieval centre of Leith that was predominantly farmland up until the 19th century. Here the site was transformed into the Anderson Iron Works. Throughout the 19th century, the foundry expanded with multiple extensions and workshops being added just to the north of the site. Cornmills was established while the south wool store developed. The excavation was conducted in 2 phases, to the north and south. Area 1 contains 7 distinct structures, all of which likely contemporary, apart from structures 4 and 7. These structures directly correlate with warehouses associated with the Caledonian corn mills based on the Ordnance Survey mapping. Structure 4 likely correlates with the structure identified on the 1853 first edition plan and was incorporated into Structure 2. Most of the identified archaeological remains fall within the north, represents a distinct temporal phase of the site. An older phase of the site was identified during the removal of structures within Area 1. A ditch feature, likely associated with the Siege of Leith, was encountered there as well. Area 2 to the south contained dense collection of structural remains related within the main foundry compound. Area 2 was further contained 2 ancillary structures and cobblestone set features. This segment of the excavation was impeded by a large, frequent modern truncation of concrete foundations. The densest collection of archaeological remains was concentrated to the west of the site, and the excavation revealed this was associated with an iron foundry, which was removed and replaced by modern concrete foundations. Much of what was uncovered during the excavation appears to be a small section to the middle rear of the foundry facility, and the closest correlated mapping the foundry provided by OS 1853 survey. Much of the empty space towards the east portion of the site can be attributed to open yard space in the foundry complex. The main point of this one really is to show that we're coming up with a lot of new and interesting things about the industry of Leith, and my hope is we can eventually start tying them together and show the industrialisation of Leith, particularly as it's becoming one of the most densely populated areas in Europe currently. And future excavations will hopefully only add to this. And I can't thank enough people for all the hard work they put into this. But yeah, thank you.